Every era comes with its own horrors. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the internet was something spreading from novelty into daily life. It came with the promise of a revolution in how people connected, worked, and thought. But promises are fragile, and 2001's Pulse from Kiyoshi Kurosawa suggested that the digital revolution might hide a deeper problem, that connection was becoming a performance rather than a practice. Plenty of horror films are about the rogue nature of technology. The haunted tape in Ringu, the cursed email chain, the demon hiding inside of a cell phone. But Pulse is just a little different, because it imagines a world where the tech exposes what was already missing, instead of one where it creates the evil. So let's talk about it. We learn early on that a man has been absent from work as of recently, so a colleague of his named Mishi visits. He seems distant, but still very much alive. She leaves briefly and returns only to find now that sentiment doesn't exactly hold true. For reasons that are currently unknown, he has hanged himself with a piece of electrical wire. There's an eerie absence to the shots that follow. It lacks music and presence, yet still finds itself with an almost daunting atmosphere. That quiet nature is what Pulse relies on in order to maintain its steady ascension to madness. Now, from this point, the film diverges into two storylines. Mishi and her co-workers as they witness a slow unravelling of those around them, and Kawashima, a student who discovers a strange website filled with webcam images of strangers sitting in complete silence. He teams up with Haru, a computer science student, in order to decipher it. These threads do eventually converge, but before they do, I love the atmospheric dissonance between them. One by one, people vanish, dissolving into nothing but stains upon the wall. When I watch these sequences, I don't feel like I'm seeing the spread of a curse. I feel like I'm watching a city as it hollows itself out. The city of Tokyo in Pulse is represented in a haunting way even long before ghosts are made present in the narrative. Kurosawa fills this film with a residue, the leftover impressions of a life without the life. The city looks like it's already experienced a rapture of some kind, only no one announced it. It feels less like people are dying and more like they've simply stopped remembering why they should live in the first place. This use of space matters because horror is often very claustrophobic. Kurosawa does the opposite. He creates these wide frames and long corridors that should feel freeing, but instead underline how isolated everyone is within them. Emptiness isn't an escape here, it's a prison. Technology reveals ghosts in this universe. Kawashima's strange website discovery is a mirror. The webcam images don't depict death entering the world or the conceptualization of ghosts, they depict what it looks like to already be absent from it. They're not communicating, not trying to. They're not alive in a full sense, they're visible, but they're also not reachable. That is the core of Kurosawa's insight. The internet is something that is supposed to connect us, but it only manages to make absence legible in new ways. Kawashima can now scroll through dozens of images of people and feel in real time that they are as unreachable as he is. It's not as simple as ghosts having the ability to travel through cables. The internet has become a literal broadcast of loneliness. Every webcam is proof of existence, but proof is not presence in itself. Midway through the film, we're given the line that says death is eternal loneliness, and I think the power this holds over the thematic construct of the narrative is endless. It's not staged as this grand revelation, as this something that we've been dreading coming for the longest time, because the infection that spreads through this film isn't a physical one, it's existential. Once you begin to recognise isolation as a permanent state, you begin to fade from existence. When faced with the supernatural, the characters react with quiet resignation. Conversations thin out, and people stop reaching for one another. Some literally fade into the shadows, and the hauntings drain the will to keep living. The way I see it is that loneliness in this film works like a contagion, and you catch it by acknowledging it. Once you've seen its darkness, you can't possibly unsee it. That's why the apocalyptic event in the third act feels quiet and yet grand at the same time. It's a gradual yet irreversible retreat swapped out for a traditional large climax that you would typically see. With hindsight, the thesis of this film feels a little like a prophecy. In 2001, Kurosawa was merely speculating on an element of internet culture, but by 2025, his diagnosis feels scarily real. Studies regularly call loneliness an epidemic. Governments have described it as a public health crisis, and digital technology, which was ironically the very system meant to help solve disconnection, often only deepens it. Kawashima's obsessive scrolling through those webcams is the perfect ancestor to doom scrolling, an endless catalogue of windows into other people's lives that somehow make you feel further away the more you invest yourself. Now, part of the reason this film's themes resonate with us nowadays is because of how Kurosawa is able to translate them into sensation. He avoids the typical tropes of horror like the music stings, the quick cuts, the sudden movements, and replaces them with patience. The characters are dwarfed by the environments. Rooms remain in thought long after they've emptied, and the corridors stretch to an unnatural length. Darkness isn't a hiding place for monsters, it's an abyss that implies infinite emptiness. The most famous scare in Pulse is unforgettable because it does almost nothing. Now, this is something that I spoke more in depth about a couple of days ago on the channel, but the most effective aspect of this whole scare is patience. The spirit appears and doesn't scream or make any sort of jarring sound to grab attention. The fear is simply invited through her unnatural motion. This is the genius of this filmmaker, to create horror by erosion. He lets the dread bloom in the silence after a scene should have ended. He makes you sit in that gap between presence and absence until the gap becomes unbearable. A more subtle thread is the treatment of records, voicemails, videotapes, messages. These are meant to be anchors that root people to one another, but instead they become archives of absence. A tape proves that someone existed, and a voicemail is a monument to silence. That irony admittedly hits a lot harder now than it did back then. Now we preserve everything, from screenshots to chats to posts that we find funny and want to show people later on. Our lives are archived in endless fragments, but preservation is not the same as presence, and Pulse highlights that. We can have proof that we existed without proof that anyone was ever really there for us. Kurosawa's characters discover that same truth. Archiving isn't done as a means of fighting the oncoming absence, it's just a means of cataloguing it. It's worth remembering that Pulse released in the middle of a boom for Japanese horror. Films like Ringu, Ju-on, and Dark Water were drawing international attention, often built around a central figure or a curse. Western audiences expected ghost stories that would play out like puzzles. If you solve that mystery, you break the curse. Pulse rejects that notion. There's no curse to undo, no villain to vanquish. The haunting is an internal condition. Where Ringu uses a cursed videotape to scare you, Pulse uses technology to reflect you back at yourself. That makes it an outlier in the moment, but also the one that feels the least tied to the era that it came from. The ending of Pulse is one of the bleakest in horror cinema. There's no confrontation or catharsis or survival strategy. The world just empties, the ghosts don't have to conquer, they just appear and the people around them let go. That refusal of closure is crucial. Kurosawa has no interest in comfort, he's interested in recognition. Watching it surrounded by endless social media feeds and constant visibility, I can't shake how it feels. We have more ways to speak than ever before, but fewer reasons to believe we're being heard. The ghosts in Pulse aren't invaders, they're simply reflections, and the implication of that is chilling. It suggests that the haunting has already happened. It's never outright spoken, but I can't help but wonder whether or not it's suggesting that we're already living as ghosts. The silence that accompanies the end of this film doesn't come with a sense of relief, it almost feels like confirmation. The horror was never in the ghosts to begin with, it was in how easily we can disappear from one another's lives. It transcends genre in weird ways because it doesn't depend on an outright scare tactic. It depends on recognition. We don't need to see the phantoms in the room to understand the story that's being told here. We already know the feeling of being unseen, unheard, unreachable. That is what Pulse leaves us with.